All right, we're going to get ready and kick off in just a moment. And just wanted to let y'all know that we're going to go ahead and collect the questions that come up during the conversation. And I'm going to try and wrap up a little bit early so we've got some time for a solid Q&A at the end. And so we'll kind of rock through here and talk a bit about why design needs version control. And then we'll either address any unanswered questions at the end and or open it up for questions that anybody has at that point in time. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for making time to come hang out with us today, and really excited to share this with you guys. So my name is Josh Brewer. I'm the CEO here at Abstract. It is an incredible privilege to be able to share this with you guys today. Thank you, technology. Kind of amazing. So we're going to jump right in. Why design needs version control? This is something near and dear to my heart. And as we go through here, I hope you guys are able to glean a little bit about the backstory and really what drove us to build this. But more importantly, how this can impact design's role in any organization, increase the ability for really thoughtful and concrete collaboration with other stakeholders and our counterparts in other parts of the business, as well as really beginning to demystify design to the rest of the organization. All right, so we're kicking it off. Shipping great products takes a team. Unless you're a one-man, shop who designs and develops maybe mobile apps or something else, by and large, you're working with other people. And really, in my experience, shipping truly great products requires an entire team to be not only working together and communicating in a healthy way, but really committed to the same end goal and finding ways to collaborate more effectively. Design ends up sitting at the intersection of a lot of these functions within the business, and especially in the functions that are needed to deliver a great product experience. Whether it's, some of them are more obvious: engineering, product management, marketing, sales, executive stakeholders, could be clients. The bottom line is design ends up being this point of nexus that a lot of the other teams either need to connect with or are critical in collaborating with in order to bring something like this to life. And the interesting thing, though, is that sometimes it feels a little bit more like this. It feels a little bit like a gnarly game of rugby, and that's okay. I always like to say if it was easy, it probably isn't worth it. And that's not to say that, things should be hard all the time. But the reality is that when any group of humans are endeavoring to do something, it ends up, it's work. And I guess we call it work for a reason, right? The important thing for me, and something that I've really driven home in any role that I've been in as a leader and in any of the startups that I've advised, is that consistent, clear communication ends up being probably the single most important part of making any of these endeavors work. Whether it's amongst a team of designers or it's design working with any of the other constituent parties that I mentioned, clear and consistent communication is the way that you avoid mistakes, course correct in efficient and timely manners, bring more diverse input, create more opportunities for people to have direct input into the end experience. And you realize that designers are needed defining the visual elements of the system. You need developers in there, content strategists, researchers, product managers, leadership functions. And not every project has all of these constituents, and not every one of these constituents actually has an active role in every project. But at the end of the day, for each of these teams to be aware of what design is doing, to be aware of where design is in the process, to have open lines of communication, and maybe more importantly, have predictable workflow and predictable ways to get the feedback you need when you need it. That little concept, getting the feedback you need when you need it, is something that in my career has proven to be probably one of the biggest challenges. There are a lot of times where you've put in a ton of work and you think you have everything you need and you're pretty much ready to go, and then you don't get a review or you don't get the right eyes on it and it sits for a while. And then potentially somebody comes in and is like, well, why is this way? And at least in my experience, most often it was because that person wasn't able to participate throughout the process. Doesn't mean they have to be in every meeting. Doesn't mean they have to be involved in everything. It just means that they need a predictable way to engage with design as the process is unfolding. And this is something that, in my experience, and as a designer, as a design manager, as someone who's led large initiatives at large scale companies, this ends up being the thing that if you can improve it, everything else levels up. And so, at the end of the day, I end up asking this question: how do we move faster? I would say if anybody is on this webinar and thinking about using abstract or actively using abstract, you're wondering how you can move faster. How can we be more efficient and effective in our work? We don't want to work harder necessarily, but we want to work smarter. And the way to take advantage of the technology that we have in front of us in order to get outsized gains is to begin looking at some of the other constituent parties that we work with and what their workflows look like. In my career, all the way up until the time I joined Twitter in 2010, I wrote almost all of my own front end for any of the things I designed. And so I was very comfortable moving back and forth between a design and a developer kind of approach. And every time I worked over on the development side of things, I used Subversion or Git or any sort of a version control system. And I deeply understood the benefits of this. We'll get into this a little bit more in the talk, but it became the driving force for me to try and figure out how can we have design have some of the benefits of these types of ways of working. And at the end of the day, moving faster definitely does not look like this. I don't know if anybody on this call has done this, but this is a real world example from a team that we know where they literally schedule design shifts. Prior to abstract, this was the most efficient way for a team of 3 to collaborate on the same file. Claudia worked on the file from 9 until 12. She handed it over to Paul, usually by dropping a note in Slack saying, okay, Paul, I'm all done. I closed the file. You can open it now without a conflicted copy. And Paul felt a little bit gypped because now he's got 12 to 3 and he really wanted to eat lunch today. But, he's only got 3 hours with the file. So he's going to skip lunch, dives in 12 to 3. Paul dings the bell, drops a note in the Slack, says, Stephanie, your turn, go for it. Stephanie's got from 3 till 6. And if you really think about this, this is insane. I don't want to call anyone who's done this insane. I just think that for design to have adopted something like this as a workaround shows the creativity and adaptability of designers, and also shows just how antiquated and broken our workflow as a design practice truly is. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this before. The names and faces have been changed to protect the innocent, but this is an actual quote from a screenshot from a team prior to using abstract. And, not having to jump into Slack and tell everyone you're going to open a file seems like a benefit. Seems like it might save a little bit of time. And I've had a lot of conversations with folks that are like, this isn't really that big of a deal. And on the surface, I get it. It's not that big of a deal. We can make it, design, I think, has been really, really amazing at adapting. We will kind of figure out whatever we need to do in order to get the job done. And what I think has happened over the last, call it 10 to 15 years, is we have conditioned ourselves into thinking that this is normal and this is like the best way that we could work. And it might seem like no big deal, but these kinds of inefficiencies, when taken in aggregate, lead to a ton of overhead. They lead to a ton of time being wasted. They slow you down. And so again, I ask, how do we move faster? We look to our developer counterparts, and we can see how they've benefited from sophisticated version control tools for decades. Design still is playing catch up in a big way. And I think one of the things I always like to share that like kind of drives this point home for me is a quote from Khoi Vinh, who is awesome designer in his own right and is a principal designer at Adobe. He says, designers still use shockingly manual and even arcane methods of managing versions. And it would blow me away if you talk to any developer right now and ask them, do you have any code currently sitting on your machine that isn't version controlled? Do you have, any components that you've built out, say for a design system, that aren't version controlled? And the resounding answer will be no. I don't know a good developer or a developer that's worth their salt that doesn't start every project by initializing a Git repo or some, Git Mercurial, Subversion, whatever, some version control. If we want to move faster, and if we want to have better communication and collaboration, the first place just between design and development, but design and the rest of the business, we really have to get out of the way that we have been conditioned to work into something that I think is a little more future-proof, a little more resilient, and at the end of the day, does a bunch of the heavy lifting for us. So, version control systems, what are these? Many of you in the audience today might already know what a version control system is. You've probably heard of GitHub. I've experienced a wide range of exposure to these concepts and to these tools in the designers I've spoken to over the last few years. But to sum it up very quickly, version control systems, they're a category of software tool. It helps you manage changes to work over time. Specifically for software development, it manages shared code repositories. So an entire team is able to work on the same code base at the same time with tools that are built in so that they don't overwrite each other's work, ways to resolve those types of conflicts, increase transparency and visibility into what they're doing. If you make a mistake, you can turn back the clock and compare it with an earlier version. At the end of the day, version control ends up protecting the work from both like catastrophe and human error. And maybe human error might be a little too harsh. Maybe we just call it unintended consequences of just doing our day in and day out work. And to me, that sounds pretty useful. One of the things that was really powerful to me in my time at Twitter, for those of you that don't know, I served as a principal designer there. I was at Twitter from 2010 to 13. Was really fortunate to help grow that team, see it scale, worked on several large initiatives. And one of the big paradigm shifts that we had partway through my time there was introducing version control as a concept. And when you work in a version controlled manner, you move from this notion of my files into our files. And on the surface, that seems like a small thing, not a very big deal. I'm here to tell you it is a fundamental shift in the way you think about the work, in the way that you behave as a team, in the way that you communicate things. With a version control system, everybody on the team is able to work freely in parallel on any file at the same time. There's no question as to where the latest version of a file is or what the state of the whole project is. It's in a common central place. The cultural implications of a version control system, though, are even more profound. So going from my files, these are my files in my folder, maybe even on my desktop, God forbid, into this world of these are ours. I worked on this file today, and so did Tim. And we both know, because we both have these safe spaces of working. What ends up happening as you look at the communication and what I like to call the cultural implications, the first one is that version control is communication. By its very nature, working in this manner creates communication that is pushed out and can be consumed by others, without you having to do a lot of the heavy lifting. There's a handful of concepts in version control that I think are worth kind of running through real quickly. In at least Git vocabulary, what we call projects in abstract are technically called repos or repositories. Think of it as a big bucket to put stuff in. At the end of the day, that's really what it is. For us in abstract, projects are spaces that each organization can create to organize their work and the initiatives. Some organizations use projects to manage specific product lines or platforms. Others use it to separate client work. Others do a mix. Bottom line is it becomes these great little containers with intention. Inside of projects, you have this concept of your master files. We're all pretty familiar with this. If your stuff is stored in Dropbox or Google Drive, you know, the kind of like default set of files that we all reference and work from are our master files. In a version controlled world, those master files serve as the source of truth, the kind of like, okay, these are the approved and verified designs that we should be operating against. And while that's very valuable, what's even more valuable is branches. So branches, interesting word, throws a lot of people off. At the end of the day, a branch is a safe space for you to do a specific line of work. It also gives others insight into the type of work that you're doing at that time. Branches are really duplicate or working copies, I should say, working copies of the master files that only you can edit. So when you're working on, say, your task for this week is to redesign the onboarding flow, you might create a branch called onboarding flow redesign, or you might call it something else that's more reflective of your company's culture and how they would describe it. But at the end of the day, when that branch gets created, there's not only a message in the system, but it can be pushed out as well, letting people know, basically alerting them to the fact that this work is happening. Really, really valuable as design is continuing to try and have more and more influence and more of a seat at the table in kind of like broader business decisions and how the company's operating. It's things like this that garner design the respect and the accountability that I think is required for us to be able to step into that place. A part of the branch kind of model that is, again, more communication is this notion of commits. We like to say commits are the new Command S. So ignoring autosave, I don't know about you guys, I've been a compulsive Command S person for as long as I can remember. And Command S is basically like, I don't want to lose any work. I don't want to lose any work. I don't want to lose any work. In a version control system, all those changes are being tracked as you go along. And when you hit save, it basically collapses that set of changes together. When you want to effectively like record or capture that set of changes at a specific point in time, you create a commit. And a commit is really just like a super save with a note. That's kind of the way that we've kind of talked about it before. You can see what's changed. You can leave information for folks who are kind of following along. There's a number of techniques. Folks on our team will use commits to iterate through multiple different explorations. So somebody might try, I don't know, take our project card, for example, might iterate through 5 different versions of how that could be laid out, each one in a specific commit, allowing the team to see the progression of ideas, allowing the designer to leave context for what they were trying to solve in each commit, and ultimately the ability to roll back to whichever one effectively becomes the winner and use that as the state going forward. And then last but not least on this notion of communication is reviews. So in abstract, we have what we call review requests. It's really it's built off of the feature in the product called branch statuses. So branch status is a real lightweight way. Again, it's about sending signal, going from work in progress to open for feedback. That's a real important moment where you signal to your team, hey, I'm kind of at a state where I could use some eyeballs on this. Or if you're actually ready to go into review, you can assign or request specific people to review the work before it gets the thumbs up and gets merged into that master set of files, that source of truth. Building consensus with the right stakeholders as you go has been one of the more powerful kind of call it side effects of a version control system that I've seen, especially with Abstract, but even prior to that, even in GitHub, when you think about their version of this, which is a pull request, it's a way of building consensus, having the right people give feedback so that you can either go back and iterate through those changes or get approval and move forward. The next kind of big cultural implication around a version control system is transparency. Transparency to us, really, it means that we all know what's going on all of the time. That means that a single source of truth for designs that can't be accidentally overwritten. It means a team that can confidently say, I know where the latest version of any file is. It means a public and centralized, public internal to your company, a centralized destination for seeing design updates, being able to observe the design process, and the ability to leave feedback and comments and ask questions. The power of all of this, though, is that it's actually attached to the file itself. It's not floating in a Google Doc. It's not in an email thread. It's not in some chat. It is actually connected to the file itself. It's part of the work, and it's part of the history of the work. And to me, that kind of transparency is critical for design to build up the trust with the rest of the organization. Unfortunately for us, there's a lot of people who still have absolutely no clue what design does or how it really does it. They see the output, they see the artifact, which is a picture of the future that they, hopefully want to go build or move towards. And I've discovered over and over and over, a lot of people think that what we do is just magic. We're in a meeting one day, we disappear for a week, we come back and here's a fully realized, version of the thing that we talked about a week ago. And people can't observe the process. They don't understand the amount of work that goes into designing a product. They aren't familiar with the notion of like divergent and convergent work. And by increasing this transparency and kind of like peeling back the, I guess opening the curtain is a better analogy. They're able to participate, they're able to observe how design functions. And I think one of my favorite things I heard a little while ago was a couple of developers were like, oh my God, you designers do a lot of work. And I was like, okay, these are people I've known for years, and they're just kind of like having an aha moment about the amount of work that goes into designing anything. And so if for no other reason, it might be worth it just for that. Moving on, another one, again, we're talking about the cultural implications of version control, right? Reviews or consensus. As I alluded to earlier, the right feedback at the right time from the right people is incredible. If we can collapse the feedback loops that happen in our day in and day out work to go from 2 to 3 days before I get feedback to 2 to 3 hours before I get feedback to 2 to 3 minutes before I get feedback, you begin to easily see how this allows design to not only move faster, but also increase the footprint and kind of the scale of what we're able to accomplish, because we're not sitting around waiting to go to a meeting or get somebody's attention that won't happen until next Tuesday, right? With a tool like this, and really with the version controlled workflow, you have that feedback loop happening in tighter and tighter and tighter cycles. It also, by having reviews as part of your workflow, it's an opportunity for all the invested parties to really ask critical questions, evaluate how well the solution is solving the problem at hand, assessing any risks, technical, copy, strategic. Really, at least in my mind as a designer, I really want that kind of feedback. I want to open the door for people to ask questions and push on whether or not the design that I'm proposing really truly solves this problem. Because if so, we need to get it into our developers' hands as quickly as possible, and we need to then get it to our customers, right? Again, I probably sound a bit like a broken record, but to me, it's how do we get these products to our customers faster? How do we communicate more effectively so that we can work more efficiently, so that we can ship these products to our customers faster, right? The really cool part about this is transparency plus consensus equals blamelessness. Now, this is a quote from Aaron Suggs, who used to be a director of engineering at Kickstarter. The first time I heard him say this, it hit home for me. There's a notion of, I think, protection as a designer. I feel like there's a little bit of work you do that constantly kind of shield yourself from potentially, blame that is not yours. And often blame ends up happening because of a lack of communication. It ends up happening because one party didn't have input at the right point in time, or who knows? There's a lot. Blame is a big. We could probably talk about that alone for an hour. But for me, this notion of transparency plus consensus, it takes the blame out of the picture. Everyone is aware of what's happening, and they participated in the feedback cycle. And if they didn't, then they kind of don't get to point fingers and cast blame, because you've created a process and a structure that contains and drives people to this place of consensus and agreement. And I have found that to be an unbelievably freeing thing as a designer. I also, as a human being, it's kind of really nice to not feel like I constantly have to dodge bullets and feel like I'm having to defend myself all the time. By removing that fear, I think we can be more open. I think we can be more candid. And also, it serves as a really great reminder that we're actually all in this together. It's not design versus engineering or design versus product or any of those things that I think are tensions that happen because of a lack of communication and a lack of clarity. This notion, to me, is kind of foundational to what we've built at Abstract as a company. It's core to the product that we've put out there. And at the end of the day, it's my deep hope and belief that by moving our industry into this kind of a process and workflow, we're going to be able to be, we're going to be in a position where we're relied on, we're brought into things earlier, we have an active role in shaping the future that we want to see. And I've just seen enough evidence at this point that this way of working can dramatically improve that for us. The last real big one that I want to talk about is, how does version control allow design to scale, right? For any of you who are on a team that's hiring, or you've gone through growth very recently, you're probably very familiar with the pain of bringing on a couple more designers. I was really fortunate during my time at Twitter to help grow that team. It was about 5 to about 50 by the time I left. And we went through several, growth spurts and had growing pains. And team after team after team that I talk with, and companies that I've advised, this ends up coming down as like one of their biggest questions. How do we scale design? It isn't just throwing more designers at it, I promise you. We'll get all of the same problems, just at scale. So I'm gonna rock through my list of things that I believe version control enables. So a complete change history for every file. This helps teams by tracking every change by a contributor and help prevent conflicting work. Branching, committing, and merging is a predictable workflow. It's something that both design and the rest of the company can get their head around and be able to participate in and observe. No more conflicted copies. I don't know about you guys, but just the time saved not having to go open 2 files and try and figure out what the hell is different between them was one of the biggest things for me behind all this that we're doing. No accidental overwriting of your library files. I've seen this personally and experienced it. We've seen it with so many other teams. When you're really moving into a kind of a design system driven environment where you're striving for more consistency and more continuity in the product design experience, you need to rely on that. But if you can't depend on those symbols and those objects in that library being the right thing, man, it can really mess things up. It's one place where stakeholders can actually follow along with design and the design process. They can leave feedback, they can reference the latest work. Yes, there are ways that you can do this ad hoc, but it always ends up being disconnected from the actual work itself, disconnected from the files where that work lives. And I think anything that we do that pushes something to a disconnected system ends up being more overhead than is necessary. It's a clear process for reviewing and approving work. It's a clear process for how you add new parts to the system. So a quick example of that, if your design system is emerging, having a branch type of workflow to propose new pieces ends up being really valuable. People can test them in a kind of sandboxed way to make sure that they don't break everything. And then they can publish them through our linked libraries feature. It has a huge impact on the amount of time it takes to onboard new designers. One of the things that I've seen in our company, but I've also heard from several other design leaders, was this idea that, oh my God, I can bring in a new designer and I basically point them at our projects, and within a day, they are up to speed with what's going on. They have historical context they can always go back through. I've even heard of teams using branches as a way to mentor and teach junior designers. So you'll have a senior designer paired with a junior designer, and effectively, the junior designer is creating a branch to follow along with the senior designer so they can observe how that person's making their decisions, the types of things they push on. They can also work alongside them and get feedback, and each of them can push their changes to one another. So it ends up being really powerful for onboarding new designers and kind of mentoring and growing more junior designers as well. It really reduces the time spent managing all the work around the work. So jumping from Slack to Jira to, all of a sudden being in some docs in Google or Paper, email chains, it just collapses that down to a handful, if not only one place where you have to go for those things. Increases productivity of the team by building, maintaining, and using a design system that effectively can be linked and published to any other project in your organization. There's some real efficiency gains that comes there. Increased transparency and feedback throughout the design and build process. We have a feature called Inspect. Your developers can come in as viewers. They can go directly to the file, to the screen they need, go to the Inspect tab and get all of the measurements and red lines and data that they need to go implement that design, which I think is super powerful, that it's not disconnected from the actual work. If new commits come in on that file, there's updates in the Inspect panel so they can understand only the things that changed. So for developers, not having to guess at what the hell changed between A and B, but actually having it called out for you, super valuable, saves time. And then last, but definitely not least, right, is increasing diverse input. The design process becoming observable by the rest of the company. In my experience, one of the most powerful things has been when someone outside of design has an insight, comes from a diverse perspective, has a use case that we hadn't thought of before. I don't know about you guys, but as a designer, I have, as much as I wish that I had like this big, huge, holistic picture of the whole world, I think the reality is I just don't. I have my picture. And I try as hard as I can to broaden that and to bring in as much information as I can to make good decisions. And at the end of the day, the only way you really can like level up that power is by increasing the diversity of input that comes in during that design process. So that's why we built Abstract. Abstract is a design workflow platform for modern teams. It's one place to manage, version, and collaborate on your design files. Today, it's sketch files. We're in active development on Adobe XD and Adobe Illustrator. We're in conversations with several other teams, building great tools about bringing them to Abstract. Our long-term vision has always been that we want you to be able to bring all of your design work and have it live in one place. And we're steadily marching toward that reality. I thought I would show a couple of very quick examples of a couple teams that are using abstract and doing some cool stuff. And then I want to be hyper aware of the time and make sure that there's opportunity for questions and answers. So real quickly, Shopify. Shopify was one of our earliest and biggest customers. They came in right before we even had our private alpha out, and they have been amazing partners as we've been growing and supporting their workflow. Their project for their design system that they call Polaris, to me, has been one of the best examples of a large organization's efforts around building a truly versatile and robust design system, sharing that with the world. I don't know about you guys, but I was so thankful that they open sourced it, put it up on GitHub, allowed the world to come observe it, and are actively maintaining and investing in this. Their components, they have a ton of documentation, and all of that is also powered by the exact same objects in abstract. And so, their design system, some of their core components, the way that they, set their actions, titles, text, all of these pieces live in abstract, are as linked libraries that are useful to everyone in every other project. All the way down to your form elements and your pickers. And at the end of the day, the things that are being pushed to the actual documentation repository and the connection to those core objects in abstract is really powerful. It's polaris.shopify.com up on GitHub. Should totally encourage you to take a look at that. Thumbtack is another team that's done some really interesting stuff. They have a team that manages their design systems, and it ends up having two tiers of projects, which is really an interesting concept. They have one that's the approved version of the design system that everyone's actually using in their day in and day out work. And they have a private project, which the design systems team actually uses as a sandbox to test all those ideas, work through all of the use cases, really make sure that anything that's introduced for everyday usage has been thoroughly vetted. And so by using our linked libraries feature along with Sketches libraries, they're able to really, really effectively craft their design system and make sure that it's as resilient and kind of bulletproof as possible. Here you can see the design system and then the first contact. So you can see people proposing some new things to be added into the project. So these are, this is a much older screenshot, but that they were willing to share, and I'm very thankful for. But this is their, private one where they're proposing new things in and testing them out. Goes all the way into their elements, icons, buttons. Really robust system that's powering how they're doing design. The last one I'll share is a company called Layer. They are really building some interesting stuff around conversational design. They have an entire kit that they send to all of their partners and customers that they work with. And they built their entire design system into abstract. They use abstract to connect with their customers to help them build out customized instances of the integration. And it's allowed them to scale up their design operation and serve a way bigger audience with a lot less people. And I couldn't be more excited about the work that they're doing there as well. Again, just some screenshots of all of their different pieces. They've broken theirs down in a kind of like atomic design approach, and ends up being really, really powerful for them. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up, say a giant thank you to all of you for listening. And then I very much would love to be able to answer some questions. And so I'm going to see if I can transition real quick out of screen share. Hang on. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Oop, there. I don't know about you guys if you've ever played Zoom. There's this game of I can't see my mouse, but all right, can y'all see me? Okay, yes, and I'm back. Got some Q&A going on over here. Bear with me. I still have no mouse whatsoever. All right. Oh, I think we're screen sharing over there. All right, I'm going to read through a handful of these. John Goff asked, I would like to know more about selecting the best version control solution, particularly abstract versus Cactus. John, Cactus hasn't been maintained for at least well over a year and is basically a skin of the GitHub desktop client. It's not a bad product. It just doesn't do a majority of the things that we covered and talked about today. If you have further questions, I know that our team would be happy to dive in and do kind of a compare and contrast. At the end of the day, there's no support for things like linked libraries. There's no great branching methodology. You end up still being tied to the terminal. Well, not totally tied to the terminal, but you have to have more stuff set up. If you absolutely positively cannot host your files anywhere other than locally, then something like that might be an alternative for you. That said, I think things like collections, things like review requests, things like inspect, all make abstract a really compelling choice there. All right, Radley Marks, abstract merges are destructive. A merge automatically archives and destroys the branch. So it doesn't destroy the branch. I want to just clarify. There's no destruction happening. It does archive the branch, and that's the purpose of a merge. What solutions have you seen to allow design teams to maintain parity with dev environments? Dev, QA, staging, prod, if we can't maintain long-term branches. So the quickest way I could answer this, and this is not a quick answer, is there are approaches that you could take. You could have a branch that you call development, and you could merge everything into development. And only once something is actually in the wild, in production, do you ever merge it into your master files. We've seen some teams have a lot of success with that. There's many ways that you can accomplish these goals. I would need to ask you some more questions around how you're utilizing branches and where the archiving piece of it is becoming a problem to really kind of go any deeper than that. But I appreciate the question, and hopefully that was somewhat helpful. Dan Stondon asked, we're talking a lot about communication here. In that vein, could you speak to the best practices for commenting on files in a branch model? Comments on collections versus files versus branches versus master files. It's been a little confusing for our organization. Totally fair. Really appreciate you asking that. Best practices to me really come down to putting the comments on the specific objects. All of our comments bubble up to the branch level. And so you have an aggregated activity feed of all of the conversation that's been happening on all of the files in that branch. So you can go from the most granular all the way up to the branch level and pretty easily jump into any of those conversations. The notion of comments on master, really, again, I think that's a big question I would have around how your company is organizing things. Master files tend to be the source of truth. And what we have seen by and large is any comments on master files tend to be more notes of adding context or potentially something around implementation, for example. We've definitely got some ideas in the works for improvements to comments in the next year and definitely open to feedback. So if you have more comments or questions for us, you can definitely reach out to support@goabstract.com, and we'd be happy to dive in and chat more on that. Deepak Pradeep shared a question. I'm a UX designer in a team of UX designers, visual designers, and copywriters. We want all of our processes and deliverables to be transparent to each other as well as the product and development teams. Should we all be working off the same master files and creating branches, or have separate master files within the same project for each role? I would 100% recommend you not have separate master files. It actually defeats the entire purpose of working in a version controlled manner. What you're describing is basically, I think, mapping an existing Dropbox type of workflow where we each need to have like, this is home screen -jb.sketch, and someone else's is home screen -tvd.sketch, or whatever, if that makes sense. Branches absolutely are the way to do that. It allows you to work in parallel on the same files at the same time. And those branches become an indicator to the other people of what type of work specifically you happen to be doing at the time. Any example project templates we could leverage. So we don't have example projects. There's a very big, long-winded reason for that. Bottom line is it is almost impossible to maintain and keep it up to date and have it be relevant. That said, we are actively working on a number of things that we can share both on our website and in our help center around how other teams are setting up projects. We also have a number of articles already detailing these things out. Again, feel free to ping us and we can share any articles either that we have or that have been written externally that might help with that. Raquel wrote, what is the best practice to manage a conflict on the same sketch file? Maybe I'm asking something silly, but it happened to me several times when we're working in the same artboard and we need to keep both changes. For example, if you have added some icons to the library, but can only choose between one of the files. So there's two pieces of this. One is that we absolutely believe that there is better ways that we can help surface these merge conflicts and help you get through them. We're actively working on them. They are technically difficult, and so taking a bit of time there. The thing that I can recommend is if you're working in a componentized way and you're using symbols as much as possible, you can isolate the majority of your conflicts to a symbol level, and that really ends up, number one, obviating a lot of what would potentially be a conflict. Where I've seen the most things happen on an artboard is, someone changes a line of text and someone else changes the weight of that line of text. And we don't have a great way of resolving that yet. One of the things that I've done and that we've seen work really well is pop out of that update or merge flow and effectively open the other person's file untracked, copy the pieces that you need in, and then commit that. Then going through the merge flow, you won't have any of those conflicts and you'll be able to retain both changes. As I said, that's not ideal. It's a great workaround for right now, but we really want to productize a much better solution for that. So thanks for asking, and please know that we are very, very aware of it and are working on some solutions for you guys. Well, it's probably Jorge Madrigal. Please forgive me if I mispronounced. Why would someone choose abstract over Envision DSM? Do you guys push to get pages to make your styles public? So two questions there. I'll answer the first one first. No, we don't push to GitHub pages to make styles public at this point. That is something that I think could be automated with our SDK, which is just in beta right now, sdk.goabstract.com. If you want to sign up for the waitlist on getting into the beta and having some access there. We don't personally have that functionality today, but we very much believe that the SDK can enable something like that, and we're really excited about it. Why would someone choose abstract over Envision DSM? If I'm really honest, I feel like it's a little bit inappropriate for me to go dive into a abstract versus Envision DSM conversation with everyone here. What I can say is at the end of the day, what we hear from our customers is that the ability to have all of your components and styles, text styles, layer styles, whatnot, living in a library file, version controlled, and able to be linked to any other project has been far and away more useful than trying to push everything into DSM. I don't use DSM, and so I can't really honestly speak to pros and cons versus them. Maybe someone else on this webinar has some ideas and can reach out and answer that better than I can. Any plans for component documentation? I'd love to have my documentation right inside abstract. I totally agree with you. We are definitely thinking about it. As I alluded to before, have some ideas around how we can evolve comments. Imagine more persistent comments that are, specifically for documentation, as well as more seamless integration into systems that can do documentation. So don't have it right now, but absolutely thinking about it, and something that in 2019, I really think that we would like to make some big progress on. We'll go ahead and do a couple more questions. Is there a way to build cross-branch collections or a plan to support that in the future? Or keeping collections after a branch is merged? Great question. We're absolutely, so no, there's no way to do cross-branch collections today. We are definitely thinking about it. It has some complications that we are currently trying to figure out how we're going to solve. And so we're definitely thinking about it. We understand the value there. We run into it ourselves. Keeping collections after a branch is merged, yes, absolutely. And in fact, fingers crossed, it'll either be in the next release or the release after that. We have some nice improvements to collections that are coming. They're actively being developed right now. And so we're really excited to get those into everyone's hands. One more, a lot of change can happen in a design file over the course of an hour. How often should design changes be checked in? Can you explain how that works in abstract briefly? Great question. Yes, thousands of changes can happen in an hour. Committing is something that I always say you commit early and often. Some people have a lot of fear around sharing their work as it's in progress. I can say that in my career, the sooner I started sharing my work, the more effective my solutions became, the more diverse input I got, and the better the ultimate end result was. So I would say commit early and often. It also really depends on what types of changes you're trying to communicate. If you're diving into a component and you really need to make sure everyone is aware of exactly what changed in this one component, you might make a commit just for that set of changes. If you're working on a broad exploration, you may, work for an hour or two and then commit all of that stuff, go back in and start deleting out the things that you don't really think are going to move forward, and commit that new chunk of exploration and keep doing that. So short story, commit often, and think about committing different types of activities. So you might do a big update where you touch thousands of components and thousands of layers. And you might want to just make a commit that's, I'm updating all the stuff, guys, right? Like maybe you don't need to come in and dig in. This is just kind of perfunctory work that needs to be done. So hopefully that's helpful. Also, we have an article on our blog about, I think it's 6 or 7 great tips on being a great committer. So feel free to take a look at that. There are a couple more questions I'm going to quickly answer. One is overrides have become a huge workflow problem for our team. Every time there's a merge, we get a wave of overrides. What is being done to address this? There are some things that are in our control, and there are things that we can't control due to the way that Sketch is operating. It's something we're actively talking about. We don't have an answer yet. I'm just going to be very transparent. If you want, this is from Jess Pendleton. If you want to write into support and get in touch with our team to articulate specifically what you guys are running into, that'd be incredibly helpful for us. We're always listening and we're always taking your feedback seriously in helping develop this product. Last but not least, any plans to support public projects? Someday. We have a lot of stuff and not enough people to build it, but it's very important to me, and I really, really hope that we're able to get to it soon. And a Framer integration. Someone asked, are there plans for one? There are not plans yet. We are talking with the Framer team. Again, we are resource constrained in the number of things we can do in parallel right now, even though our team is growing like crazy. We love what those guys have built and definitely want to support them. And so, short answer is yes, we very much want to support Framer, and we're looking to figure out how and when we can do that. With that, I have to go because I've got to go do an all hands meeting with my team. And I just want to thank all of you for joining today. Really, really appreciate your time and attention. And as always, if you have thoughts and questions, please feel free to holler at us, write in, support@goabstract.com. We're also on Spectrum. Love to engage with you guys there as well. And with that, have a great rest of your day.